how standards replace borders. For centuries, borders defined power. They marked where rules applied, where authority ended, and where responsibility began. If something went wrong, the map told you who was in charge. Until one day, the map stopped answering that question. London had thrived in a world of jurisdictions. Laws anchored finance in place. Regulation followed geography. Control depended on territory. As long as capital respected borders, authority could follow it. But capital learned to move faster than borders could respond. To understand why this mattered, we must return to the moment when rules began detaching from land. Transactions crossed multiple jurisdictions instantly. Firms operated everywhere at once. Decisions affected markets far from where they were made. Borders still existed, but they no longer contained behavior. The reveal came when standards began doing the work borders once did. Instead of asking where an action occurred, the system asked whether it met a shared expectation. Practices converged across regions. Compliance became a matter of alignment, not location. Standards traveled where borders could not. London became a testing ground for this shift. Firms followed global benchmarks more closely than local law. Contracts referenced shared frameworks instead of national codes. Trust depended on adherence to norms recognized everywhere, not permission granted somewhere. This transformation changed power quietly. Authority no longer rested solely with governments. It moved to those who defined standards others relied on. Influence belonged to those who shaped expectations that crossed borders effortlessly. London was no longer governing finance by controlling territory. It was influencing finance by shaping rules that moved. And once standards replaced borders, the city would have to confront who truly controlled the rules that everyone followed, without ever crossing a line on a map. As standards took precedence, London's financial system began reorganizing itself around expectation rather than enforcement. Firms no longer asked which jurisdiction applied first. They asked which standard would be recognized everywhere. Consistency became more valuable than sovereignty. This shift altered incentives across the city. Aligning with widely accepted standards reduced friction instantly. Deals closed faster. Trust traveled further. Deviating from standards, even when legally permissible, became risky. Markets punished inconsistency more harshly than noncompliance. Institutions adapted quickly. Internal rules were rewritten to mirror global benchmarks. Risk models referenced shared assumptions. Reporting aligned with frameworks designed to satisfy multiple authorities at once. Standards simplified complexity by replacing dozens of borders with a single expectation. But this efficiency carried hidden consequences. Standards are shaped by those with influence, not those with votes. They evolve through practice, not debate. Once embedded, they resist change. What begins as coordination can quietly become control. London saw this tension emerge firsthand. Smaller actors struggled to influence standards they were expected to follow. New entrants faced barriers not written into law, but baked into norms. Power shifted toward those who defined what normal looked like. The danger intensified when standards drifted away from reality. Assumptions hardened. Frameworks lagged changing conditions. Yet deviation remained costly. Markets enforced standards even when they no longer fit. Consistency mattered more than accuracy. Regulators found themselves in unfamiliar territory. Enforcement based on borders could not reach standards that operated everywhere. Authority followed practice rather than directing it. Governance trailed expectation. London confronted a difficult truth. When standards replace borders, power relocates quietly. Control no longer depends on territory, but on influence over norms. And norms, once adopted widely, become harder to challenge than laws. The city was now approaching a critical question. If standards govern behavior across borders, who governs the standard themselves? The conflict sharpened when standards began failing in unison. Frameworks trusted precisely because they were universal produced the same blind spots everywhere at once. What was meant to reduce fragmentation now synchronized error across the entire system. London felt the consequences immediately. Firms compliant by every measure suffered simultaneous stress. Risk models aligned perfectly and failed together. The very consistency that made standards powerful now made them dangerous. When assumptions broke, they broke globally. Participants discovered how little room existed for deviation. Acting outside standards invited suspicion, even when conditions demanded flexibility. Innovation slowed. Adaptation hesitated. Markets punished divergence faster than they punished error. Safety lay in conformity. Institutions tried to respond, but authority struggled to reach the source of the problem. Standards were not owned by any single regulator. They evolved through committees, conventions, and market practice spread across jurisdictions. No one could revise them quickly. No one could suspend them decisively. Public trust weakened as well. If everyone followed the rules and still failed, what had governance achieved? Standards appeared neutral, but their origins were opaque. Their assumptions unquestioned. Their power undeniable. The breaking moment came when a widely adopted standard was shown to be fundamentally misaligned with reality. Its logic made sense in theory, but not in practice. Yet abandoning it carried enormous cost. Entire systems were built around it. London confronted a sobering realization. Standards that replaced borders also replaced debate. Once adopted everywhere, they become invisible authority, governing without accountability, enforcing without enforcement. The city now faced a choice it could no longer avoid. Either standards would be made governable, or finance would remain ruled by rules no one could safely change. The resolution came when London accepted that standards could not remain invisible if they were going to govern everything. The city did not try to abolish them. It made them accountable. Standards were pulled into the open. Their assumptions were documented, their origins traced, their limits acknowledged. What had once been treated as neutral infrastructure was reclassified as a form of power, one that required review, challenge, and renewal. New processes emerged to govern standards as living systems. They gained revision cycles, stress tests, sunset clauses. Deviation was no longer treated as defiance, but as information. Standards could be paused, adapted, or replaced when reality changed. This shift restored flexibility without sacrificing coordination. Markets still aligned, but no longer blindly. Consistency remained valuable, but it no longer overruled judgment. Participants learned when to follow standards and when to question them together. London's influence evolved again. The city became less about enforcing rules and more about hosting their evolution. It convened debate where standards were tested. It shaped processes that allowed norms to change without chaos. Authority returned, not through borders, but through stewardship. The lesson endured beyond finance. Rules that travel faster than law must be governed differently. When standards replace borders, legitimacy depends on transparency. Power that hides inside norms must be exposed to scrutiny, or it will harden into fragility. London moved forward with a quieter confidence. It no longer tried to control movement. It focused on ensuring that the rules moving with it could bend, adapt, and be questioned. Sometimes the smallest shift in perspective becomes the beginning of a new future. How